Chapter 18, Straddling the Fence. Perhaps it was a strategy of Bob and his partner, Shaw, to try to steer me away from gang life by making me a full counselor and announcing I'd be operating my own boys' home within a week. My mindset clashed with the legitimate precepts of being a counselor. I was too dice-educated and self-absorbed to be concerned with adolescents confessing to the world they were baby Crips, Brims, Pyrus, whatever. I wasn't ready for this, but surely I could fake it, having been a thespian in my personal drama called Survival most of my life. I was as ill prepared to be a full counselor as I was when I was 13 and having sex with a 42-year-old woman. I was set up in a plush area with a 2-story house that had 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and a huge garage for all my weights. It didn't take my neighbors long to discover who we were and why we lived there. The second day in the house, 2 Crip youngsters, Tiny Man and Guy, got the bright idea of robbing one of the merchant booths up the street at El Segundo off Avalon. After robbing the booth with a gun, they hightailed it back to the boys' home and were followed by the same man they robbed. They were probably kicking back counting their loot when the cops banged on the front door and demanded over a loudspeaker that everybody in the house come out with their hands up. Since I was in the garage driving iron, I slowly raised the garage door to see the familiar sight of a squad of snarling white faces with badges, guns, and the certain predilection to blow me smooth away. In a crescendo of provocation, a cop barked out, "That's right, Tookie. Walk slowly toward us with your hands in the air. No quick moves." Exiting the garage, I probably looked like a huge black beast to them, with no shirt and still sweating profusely from my workout. As Tiny Man and Guy walked out of the house looking guilty as sin, a black man hollered out, "That's them, officers. Those are the 2 boys who robbed me right there." I shot an angry look at the 2 youngsters who bowed their heads. Though they were placed in the back of the patrol car, I knew they'd be back in a week or 2 since they were minors. Meanwhile, this cop with his gun pointed at me said, "Of all people, what are you doing in such a fine, upstanding neighborhood? You don't belong here. We should just blow you away and get it over with." Though I remained silent and felt defenseless, I sought comfort in the fact that under any weaponless circumstances, I could have snapped his neck like a twig, and he knew it. Another cop approached and told his buddy, who was pointing his gun at me, "He doesn't have any warrants, so we have to cut him loose. It's a shame. We know the boys' home is a front for criminal activities, Tookie. You're free to go, but we'll be back." They kept their word and returned with what appeared to be FBI agents who never spoke a word but only observed. Neighbors gawked as I was handcuffed and taken down to the Glass House, a local Los Angeles jailhouse, where I underwent several lie detector tests. This time I was accused of having burglarized the Compton Military Armory and stealing a large arsenal of AR-15s, rocket launchers, and ammo. In their minds, either I did it, ordered some other Crips to do it, or had knowledge of it. This was the beginning of the mythical super ninja stamina that cops branded me. This was the beginning of the mythical super ninja stamina that cops branded me with. In their minds, I could perform the impossible, even steal their guns while they were looking at me. For the first time in that neighborhood, cops were patrolling and surveillance was established to watch my movements. The following week, we were out there after a petition was filed against us to leave. The next house we moved to was located off Compton and Avalon in the neighborhood of the Swamp Boys, allies of the Pyrus. It didn't take long for the Swamp Boys to find out who I was, which prompted them to cruise by in snail fashion, red-eyeing me and flashing their guns. Often as I washed my car, Lee stood guard with a visible weapon, and several times I had to restrain him from blasting the cars. I knew it wasn't kosher for a counselor to be openly involved in gunfights. Shortly after, a homeboy of mine, LC, from the East Side Backstreet Crips, started visiting me at the boys' home. Years earlier, before he became a Crip, he and his homeboys stumbled into the Rio Theater and were relieved of their leather coats, hats, money, and dignity after being stomped. Though he knew I was the one who took his white wide brim and decked him we became tight over the years. Around that time, there were regular sneak assaults launched against the Swamp Boys, and the cops blamed me, LC, and Lee. During the short period we lived in that area, the Swamp Boys converted into the Swamp Crips. I don't know what he told them, but they used to darn near salute with excitement whenever they saw me out and about in the hood. Meanwhile, Lee and some of the Swamp Crips went out to a party in another neighborhood and turned it out. The next thing I knew, the cops were looking for all of them, and the community had posted flyers throughout Compton with photos and descriptions of Lee, accusing him of rape. By then, some of the Swamp Crips had been busted. I saw Lee a few times before he was arrested. He didn't seem the least bit worried about being the subject of a growing manhunt. He finally succumbed to his mother's pleas to turn himself in. But not long after Lee was locked up, Bob suggested that I enroll in the Compton Junior College. What motivated me to enroll was that I'd be getting paid for going. While in class, I had mixed emotions, boredom with some interest. I used to look around and wonder, what in God's name was I doing here amongst all these busters? Many of them were struggling to get an education to obtain a vocation. Plus, the extracurricular ambience of the school was about fashion, gossip, and sex. I was trying to balance an educational impossibility, an alliance between stupidity and wisdom, and trying to straddle the fence between cripping and counseling. The school odyssey lasted for only several months. Then it was sayonara. A couple weeks later, an English teacher from Compton College called and tried to convince me to come back. He said, "You're quite intelligent, Stan. You should rethink coming back to school." I believe he heard the loud "hell no" before the click. With school out of the way, I was beginning to settle in where we lived until Bob told me that we had been petitioned to move again. We were relocated to another fine-looking house on Slater and Stockwell. It was beautiful inside. There were ceiling-to-floor mirrors that covered an entire living room wall, with the same kind of mirrors on the closet doors. The place had 2 baths, 3 bedrooms, a large breakfast nook, a large patio with artificial turf, flower beds, floodlights, a huge pool. There were ceiling-to-floor mirrors that covered an entire living room wall, with the same kind of mirrors on the closet doors. The place had 2 baths, 3 bedrooms, a large breakfast nook, a large patio with artificial turf, flower beds, floodlights, a huge pool table, and security bars around the entire house. There were also 2 backyards separated by a brick fence and a large garage. It was a place tailor-made for me. I had 2 full-grown Doberman pinschers for each yard and a pit bull puppy named Cuz. Under my guardianship, the house was kept immaculate. The youths were well fed, clothed, clean, and attended school. Odd that I could play father to them, but was too trifling to care for my own sons. Trayvon and Stanley, whose mother was my then girlfriend, Beverly. Being irresponsible and low-minded, I convinced both Bonnie and Beverly to not list me as the father. To say they weren't sure who the father was, so I could avoid paying child support. I had stooped low and didn't feel the slightest discomfort about my lack of ethics. But I was, at the same time, the paternal figure for a house full of youngsters: Cross, Guy, Tiny Man, Dennis, Leroy, and others. Though it was hypocritical to me to try to convince them not to live foul when I was living fouler than foul, I tried anyway. It didn't matter that I was unreachable, unsalvageable, and unethical. There was still something inside me that wanted better for them than I had for myself. I was expecting these youths confronted by damn conditions and caught the cycle of ganghood to accomplish the elusive goal of getting an education, uplifting other blacks, and giving a productive and peaceful life. My hypocritical theme, "do as I say, not as I do," was a garbled message. They totally ignored my words and held the worst in me as being the paradigm of what they aspired to be. It was difficult to disguise the crip art that exuded from me like liquid fire. These boys heard my name resonating throughout the streets, associated with ganghood, above and beyond anyone else's. And they loved it. And unfortunately, so did I. Outside the door of the boys' home, I was involved in a casus belli, acts used to justify war, which produced nothing but Pyrrhic victories. I fought for 3 years alongside the Compton Crips and was so recognizable that I was often mislabeled as their leader. Though I was in the forefront of a lot of madness occurring in Compton and other places, I was merely doing my duty to represent Crip and myself to the fullest. Never mind where I represented Crip. It was Westside Crips today, tomorrow, and forever. I still managed to travel to the West Side, where the Los Angeles Police Department and Lenox cops quickly learned I now drove a 1965 white Chevy. It was during my crisscrossing from Compton to the West Side that I had the suspicion I was being followed. There were occasions looking through the rearview mirror that I detect a car that was following me, but then would veer off. The cops were fanatical in their harassment of me. They acted as if I was some kind of notorious drug dealer, maniacal racist, mad bomber, corrupt politician, spy, or revolutionary. My being black provided the cops jurisdiction for harassment, and being a Crip only exasperated an already volatile matter. There were times when I was stopped, frisked, and held at gunpoint. Other cars showed up with some official types looking on while characters took pictures of me. My homeboys dubbed me super hot, meaning I was the central focus for the cops' harassment. This also meant this level of focus would bring me unwanted attention to those around me. Back then, a 30-ish black woman named Bessie, who was like a mother figure to the Avalon Garden Crips, warned me about the cops' plan to set me up to murder me. She had relatives working for the Los Angeles Police Department who told her that my name and Raymond's were on a roster called the Alphas List. From that, she gathered the list consisted of blacks who were a menace and merited extermination. Her worried suggestion was that for me to immediately leave town, and although I believed her, I was too foolish to listen. Before the long American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, had gotten wind of the Alpha List, the Los Angeles Times on December 13, 1974 ran an article, ACLU sues to kill police list of alleged dangerous blacks. A black man in his 20s had first told us about the Alpha List. He used to show up at the gym in the PJs to teach us karate. He claimed to be a member of the Blackstones Rangers in Chicago. The Alpha List, he told us, was a well-kept official secret, a police list of black male youths and adults who were systematically bumped off by the cops and then had incriminating guns planted on them. The cops, he said, were mostly setting up black Chicago gangs like the Black Stone Rangers, the Disciples, and others. I listened but dismissed him as being a nut. I thought that whatever happened in Chicago couldn't possibly happen to me here in South Central. Short of killing me, they had pretty much covered all the bases in violating my civil rights. It was better for me to stay in Compton than to cruise on the West Side. At least in Compton, I was living a poor man's life of Riley. Access to a palatable place to rest, an easy job, paycheck, women, and several choice spots to get free gas and dairy products. During the gasoline shortage, I met several gas station attendants who assisted me with free gasoline. One such gas station and dairy combined was owned by this guy Gerald's father. He wasn't a Crip, but he knew who I was and what I stood for, so I could go there and load up on anything I wanted. On a couple of occasions, I took Cute's brother Mouse from the Magnificent Seven Crips to the gas station to fill up his car. Then one day, while high as a kite, Mouse showed up trying to get gas from Gerald's father and destroyed that particular connection. You can believe my other spot remained a secret. Still, with one foot in the Crip life and the other in the counselor realm, I decided to upgrade my image. I had to meet and talk with parents, particularly mothers, so I had to appear presentable. When I located a clean two-door 1967 powder blue Cadillac, I started styling slacks, dress shirts, suit vests, biscuit shoes, and a bald head without thick sideburns. I still wore an earring, but I bought a Gruen watch with 4 diamonds inside and a diamond ring. The only things thuggish about me were crippin' thoughts and behavior. Though I was in a position of mundane opportunities and felt comfortable operating a boys' home, my mindset prevented total commitment. I had been inculcated into the streets where neither employment nor millions of dollars could have altered my behavior. I bought into the rhetoric about survival being based on the principles of accumulated wealth, force, and violence. This was the American way. Neither the Crips nor our rivals invented greed or violence. The basic capitalist theme for man eat man. No surprise that my foremost concern was self. Although I would have defended any diehard Crip to death, my own survival was paramount. I bear witness to my own mindlessness. After Buddha's demise, I really didn't care much about anything except Cripping. The most lavish aspects of that life were funerals for our dead homeboys. These mini extravaganzas for mourning featured colorful wreaths, plush caskets, stylish clothing, and limousines so royal they made death seem appealing. A dead man, martyred Crip, appeared to receive more kudos than he did alive. In Islam, it's paradise. In Christianity, it's heaven. But for Crips, it was the expectancy of elaborate wait. Such was the case with a young block Crip named Odie, murdered at Sportsman's Park. The funeral setting for Odie's mourning was the prototype for others. A Crip's death was the last hurrah, like a falling star kissing the universe before it fades into nothingness. When Odie was laid to rest, people paraded by his casket, dropping in jewelry, pictures, drugs, Crip bandanas, money, and other memorabilia. Had Odie still been alive, many of those same people would not have given him change for a phone, yet alone a meal. After viewing Odie, who didn't look remotely like himself, I expressed my condolences to his surviving father, his mother, his family, and prepared to leave. The spectacle had turned my stomach so much, I opted not to go to gravesite with the long caravan that was being followed by a convoy of detectives and cameramen. Instead, I headed back to Compton to confront the cycle of violence, debauchery, treachery, death, and other injustices received or that we dished out. I never expected nor cared if anyone else understood me, because the only ones who could were those involved in ganghood, and like me, they had no solution. My path was a path of ignorance. I learned nothing, gained nothing, and had nothing of worth to offer anyone. I was trying to counsel teenagers not much younger than I was in age, mentality, or behavior. I was no more prepared to be a counselor than I was to be president of the United States. Being a counselor was self-serving. It provided me with a steady paycheck so I wouldn't have to be in the streets hustling or strong-arming people. The fence I sat on could no longer hold the weight of irresponsibility. The chickens were coming home to roost.